everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Art of Landscape Photography. And on episode 10, I'm going to resurrect a really old topic, a really old video of mine, stacking for noise reduction. Now, I don't hear it talked about that often anymore, but it's still as relevant today as it was when I made that video 8 years ago. But I have a lot of new followers and a lot of new people that are looking to me for information. And so here is how you stack for noise reduction. And now this is a Mac only tutorial. There is an equivalent for PC called Sequator or Sequator. I really do not have any firsthand experience with that software, so sorry PC guys, but I'm back after the holidays. It was a busy couple of weeks, and I'm excited to show you today's video. So thanks for being here and watching, and I hope you pick up something great from this video as well. Now, if you're unfamiliar with stacking for noise reduction, it is the process of taking consecutive images, one after another, and then taking those images and averaging them all together in a third-party software that will then pump out a perfectly sharp, fairly noiseless image in the end. Now, that makes it all seem really simple, but it's a little more complicated than that. Now, when you're out shooting at night, how often do you experience capturing something that looks like this? The sky looks wonderful, but the landscape is just completely black. And no matter how much shadows you lift or exposure you lift, all you see is more noise and more grain. Now, I'm going to give you a set of settings that might seem counterintuitive because of the value of the ISO. But when you take into consideration that the random noise pattern that occurs in each image can then be added and averaged all together, then it makes it seem not so scary. Now, like I said, that noise pattern that's generated from high ISOs is random. So when you have all of these images stacked together, the noise is in a different spot in each frame. And so what you can do is stack them all together and average it all out, and it keeps the stars perfectly sharp while softening and reducing the noise in all of the negative space around the stars. So typically you would use something like f2.8 or f2, f1.8, whatever your wide open lens goes to. And now having a really fast lens like that is an advantage for being able to reduce the noise or the ISO down a little bit. But a good general array of settings for a kind of a wide angle application like 12, 14, 16 millimeters, something like that, is about 13 seconds. Now, there is a great app out there called PhotoPills that can tell you exactly what your exposure needs to be for your focal length in your aperture, because the Earth's moving the whole time that you're shooting these shots. So I typically shoot on a fairly wide field, something greater than 50 millimeters. So I tend to not mind a tiny little bit of star trailing just for the sake of being able to use a slightly lower ISO and open the shutter a little bit longer. So my settings are f2.8 because that's what my wide angle lens goes to. I shoot at ISO 8 or 10,000 depending on the scene, and that's the crazy sounding part, but stick with me and I promise that you'll see an amazing result at the end. And then I typically will do about 13 to 15 seconds at that f2.8 and that ISO 8 or 10,000. So depending on your shutter speed or your aperture, that shutter speed of 13 or 15 seconds might be too long. It might be too short. So this image was taken somewhere between 30 and 45 millimeters. And so you will see when I zoom in really close, a tiny little bit of star trailing. But this is pretty typical of what you get when you go out and you shoot stars in the middle of the night. But what about when you want to print something like this, or even just be able to make a legible image out of this experience? I really enjoy capturing the landscape portion during blue hour. It allows you to use a bigger aperture. It allows you to capture more depth and more detail and more better dynamic range. So I typically wait until just after sunset. Sometimes I get a little ahead of myself, but I typically wait until just after sunset, somewhere in between there and pure darkness, and I like to capture that landscape because sometimes that means you're focus stacking, or you're doing other things, and having that extra little bit of light just allows you to have a much more legible and better image quality in the end, so that you can actually post this and really give it some good processing and even have a printable image at the end. Now, this is my finished version of this after combining those two files. But I'm not going to show you the entire start to finish today because I just released my Art of Night photography tutorial, and this image is one of the 4 images that I processed from start to finish in that tutorial. So definitely go check that out. But today I'm just going to show you how we stack 20 of these at those settings I told you about earlier, and we average it all together to create something that is literally noise free. And so over here in another tab, I'm going to zoom in here really close. We're going to go into 200% just so that you can kind of see the difference between a stacked and an unstacked sky. So you can immediately see the results. So if you've watched this far, you can see it's worth it to do this technique. This is a stacked version, and I'm zoomed in at 200%. And the image of the size of these images are massive. They're quite large, almost 8,256 pixels on the long edge. And so really high resolution here. You're seeing a really big file, and you can see that there's virtually no noise. But it took 20 of these to get to that point. But you can see when I toggle this on and off, look at how great the stars look, and all of that noise is literally gone. Now, you might ask yourself, what does that do for clouds? Because I do enjoy a little bit of clouds in my Milky Way sky. It just helps break up the sky a little bit and add a little bit of extra interest. Now, when we were capturing these frames at 13 or 15 seconds, this is what the clouds looked like. And when you stack, because of the process, it's kind of like taking a really long exposure. And another aside is that tracking the night sky is really the only technique that will get you a better result than this. But it's kind of like that. It's kind of like taking a really long exposure, and anything that's moving in the frame is going to blur. And so when we stack all of those 20 frames, we get a result with more streaky clouds like this, which can actually look really neat in a finished image when they've all kind of streaked out a little bit, because it helps kind of showcase that passage of time a little bit. And it's a little bit of a trick of the mind when you have these really sharp stars and these really kind of smooth clouds. So without further ado, we're going to get into this. So over here in Lightroom, we've got those 20 frames, the original raw files, the 20 frames. You can see this was taken at 15 seconds, f2.8, ISO 8000 at 24 millimeters. I believe that I was actually in crop mode during this because it's a little bit tighter than I think 24 millimeters would be in real life. And so if I was on my 12 to 24 and I was in crop mode at 24 millimeters, that's about the equivalent of 36 millimeters. So it gets me in a little bit tighter. And sometimes when I don't feel like switching to a 12 to 24, or a 24 to 70 for things like this, it's a real quick way to kind of punch in and get a tighter field of view. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just do a little bit of pre-processing, as I call it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to remove chromatic aberration. I don't always use the profile corrections, but in this case, I think I might. We're going to collapse that and we're going to move on to detail. Now, we have this great AI denoise function nowadays, but I promise you, I have tried it with these files. At the end of this process, I'll kind of show you what one looks like as run through that noise reduction. And it just generates a lot of artifacts. Now, it does work with scenes that have fewer stars, something that's taken a little bit closer to twilight, where you've just got a few visible stars. It works great for that. But when you've got millions and billions of little tiny spots in the sky, it tends to not work that well. And so that's why we're still using stacking. I did make jokes along my preliminary experimentation with this new feature, and I thought it was great. I was even saying things like, I'll never stack again, but I've been proven wrong, and I definitely do still see the need to stack. But at the beginning of all of that, the best way to reduce noise is to simply not enhance it, thus not sharpen it. And you have this great masking slider that allows you to mask most of that sharpness out. But if we're going to stack anyway, why not just remove sharpness altogether? And that'll give us a much cleaner file that when we get it blended in with our blue hour landscape later on, we can add some sharpness back in without the risk or worry of enhancing or sharpening that noise. And so I'm going to go ahead and just remove sharpening altogether. We're going to go ahead and we're going to move on. I'm going to adjust my white balance back down to 3800. I typically shoot around that white balance in the field. And so I'm just going to kind of get that close to 3800. And we're just going to bring this closer to 0. And then we're going to go ahead and just bring exposure up. I like to have nice bright skies. I'm not going to take it to the point where anything's overexposing, but I like to have nice bright skies in my my night image blends like this, and it does also help a little bit with the stacking. And it does help a little bit to have a brighter sky when you're blending it into a blue hour, because you think about it, you've got this blue hour scene that's got open shadows and you can see a little bit more detail, and then you're going to blend in a really, really dark sky. You're going to notice immediately that when they're blended together, they don't really look right. So I like to kind of just get ahead of a game a little bit and just brighten things up a little bit, add some whites, add some contrast. I'm not going to do a ton. I'm just going to do a few of these basic adjustments, and then I'm going to sync all of those across all of those images. And then we're going to go ahead and export these to get ready to open up in our stacking software. Now we are going to be using Starry Landscape Stacker for Mac today. Again, sorry PC guys, this is a Mac only software, but there are tons of tutorials out there for Sequator. And so hopefully if you guys have bought my Art of Night tutorial, you are not at all held back by this stacking portion. But if you have not gotten familiar with stacking, at least you'll get to see that process today. Whether your PC or Mac, it's going to be very, very similar. And so we have all of these 20 frames synced with all of those settings that we just created. Now we're going to go into right click, export, and the dialog box that opens up, I really only go to 2 of these. There's really only 2 that are relevant to us in this case. We're not going to activate any of the other settings that you can access from here. We're literally going to choose a location to store these files, which I've already done. You just are going to pick a location somewhere on your hard drive that you can access quickly when you go and open up the software. Now, you have the ability to change file names and things like that. I don't really see the point, so I'm not going to do that. Of course, this isn't a video, so nothing to do there. And under file settings, I like to work as a tip. I've tried experimenting with DNG and original, but something always happens with the white point. I either get a really, really washed out version of my image back from the software, or I get a really, really grungy, gritty version back from the software. But I find that if I stick with TIFF, I don't have any of those problems. So I'm going to stick with the sRGB color space since that's what I process in. No compression, and the highest bit depth I can get, 16-bit component here. And none of these other things we need to worry about. We want to make sure that we're not resizing and that we're not sharpening. Metadata is up to you. And I'm going to go ahead and click export. All right, now that those have exported, we're going to go ahead and open our Starry Landscape Stacker app for Mac. And we're going to select all 20 of those files that we just exported. All right, now when it finishes kind of going through all of those files, it's going to ask you, are these frames all dark frames, light frames, flat frames, or do you just want to ignore these? Now, this software can get more complicated if you choose to use it in such a way. If you are the type of person that likes to use longer telephoto lenses to shoot deep sky, celestial objects, maybe you're more familiar with dark frames and flat frames, but for all intents and purposes, and for what we're using it for, these are all considered light frames. So what I'm going to do is just highlight all of the frames that it is marked as dark, and I'm simply going to just convert those over to light frames. So now we have 20 light frames. All right, when the software first opens up and you have an image visible, you're going to see that it's basically star trails. This is just a composite of all 20 frames kind of stacked together, so you can really get an idea for how much the Earth has rotated in the course of taking all 20 of these files at 15 seconds, about 5 minutes worth of time. And so all these red dots that you see, those are supposed to be on sharp stars, so that the software, as it's analyzing each frame, it's trying to take into account the Earth's rotation, wide angle distortion, and all of those things to align those stars perfectly between each 20 of the frames. So we can't really add more stars if we need to, unless we can see those sharp stars. So I like to go down here to current image and click somewhere in the middle of the stack. And after a second, you'll see just one of the single still images. Now, usually this part isn't super important. As long as you've got most of the stars selected, it's going to do a really good job. Now, the next step is really where it's kind of crucial to be a little bit more critical. I'm going to go ahead and just choose Fine Sky. The biggest takeaway from that previous window there is to just make sure that you don't have any dots below the horizon where that could really screw up the software's blending. Now you can see here we've got all this blue patchy overlay over the sky, and all of these negative space areas are really where the software did not recognize any stars. Now you have an option. It's going to stack anything that is outside of this blue overlay anyway, so you're going to end up with a much cleaner cloud bit as it is. But if you want to really make sure that the sky is as clean as it can be, then it might make sense to go over here, select sky, and go ahead and paint in all of those areas as close to the horizon as you can really get it. I just pretty much paint over the horizon, and then I bring a brush back and I try to paint it out. Now, if you want to try to just be careful and paint right up to the edge, that's up to you. Another option really is to just kind of paint over it and not really worry that much, because you're basically not going to be using the area really close to the horizon typically anyway when you're doing this, because just the action of shooting these at an aperture like f2.8 versus something like you might shoot during blue hour, f11, f14, f16, you're going to notice that things don't line up perfectly. The edges of things at these bigger apertures are a little bit softer than on those longer apertures. So I tend to just not really worry too much about the actual horizon here, but just for the sake of being really clean, I'm going to speed through with my ground brush and just try to really carefully remove any blue from just below the horizon. Just trying to keep it as close to the edge as I can. Now, for some reason, when I'm recording my screen, I cannot see the little cursor, so this is not as precise as it would be. But you guys, when you go to do this, you will have an outline of your brush. I'm kind of flying blind here, but the end result and the method that we use in the stacking, we have a couple of options, but the one that we use is mean minimum horizon noise. So it's going to do its best to reduce the noise along the horizon, its best of its ability anyway. So this is about as close as we really need to get. Now we're going to go ahead and click Align and Composite, and it's going to take all 19 images and align it with one of them. And so don't be alarmed if it says 19 images and you're like, oh man, I had 20 in there. I promise all 20 are included in the stack, so no worries there. But immediately here, when this finishes up, you are going to see a tremendous result compared to one of the single frames that went into the stack, as we saw before we did the stacking. It's really amazing what this software can do, what this process can do. And so if we give it a second, all of a sudden we should see a tremendous difference. And there you can see all the clouds that kind of spread out and softened out. And from here, we have a couple of options. You can either save the entire image, the landscape and the sky all together as one whole image. Sometimes you get really lucky and there's enough ambient light to your landscape. Actually doesn't look that bad coming out of the software, because again, it does stack the things that are outside of that blue overlay, so the landscape actually gets stacked. But oftentimes it just looks black like this and it's virtually unusable. And so you have either the option of saving this or saving a copy that is literally just the portion that was underneath that blue overlay. So it's really a 6 in 1, half dozen in the other. It's completely up to you. I'm just going to go ahead and save that current image. And that's literally all we have to do, except open it in Photoshop, combine it with our blue hour scene, and get to blending. Thank you guys so much for watching that video. I hope it helps just crank up your night photography. If you've ever struggled with going out there and taking night images and you're just like, man, these are so noisy and they're so unusable, hopefully this technique really helps you see that you can create something really beautiful and stunning despite all odds. So thank you guys again for watching. If you want to see how I actually blend the images together, please go check out The Art of Night. It's my brand new night photography tutorial. And we kind of recover the stacking, and then there's 4 start to finish images. I go through my entire process from start to finish, and hopefully you guys will pick up some great things from that course. So again, thank you for being here. If you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, and share with your community, and I'll see you on the next one.